Great, and this is our senior group performance of Nevermore, the tragic triumph of Edgar Allan Poe.
Nevermore, take one, action.
Once upon a midnight dreary, while I wandered weak and weary, over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, as I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping.
Cut! That was all wrong.
How do you mean?
Your Poe is far too happy. Edgar Allan Poe lived a life filled with death, financial hardship, and isolation. A tragedy from beginning to end.
An author so famous for triumphantly innovating and revolutionizing American literature lived a life that tragic?
Imagine being born into a family of traveling actors on January 19, 1809. Your father, David Poe, abandons the family when you're 1 year old. Your mother, Elizabeth Arnold Poe, dies of tuberculosis a year later, penniless. Right away, you're shipped off to the household of Francis and James Allan in Richmond, Virginia, where you're looked down upon as a charity case. Francis dotes on you, but your relationship with your adopted father quickly sours in your teenage years.
A tragic childhood doesn't mean that his entire life was a tragedy.
Poe's triumphs continued. In 1826, Poe left Richmond to attend the University of Virginia. He excelled in his studies, but James Allan did not give him enough money to pay for tuition. In an attempt to resolve his debts, Poe turned to gambling. Unfortunately, he was less than successful and plunged further into debt. After James Allan refused to pay for another year of university, Poe attempted to make his fortune in the army.
He was fairly successful in that, achieving the highest possible ranking for a non-commissioned soldier. However, he decided that the army life was too dull and went to West Point instead. He managed to get in, but then he got himself expelled from the school.
After another disagreement with James Allan about finances. To make matters worse, Francis Allan had died while Poe was still at West Point.
Sir, I came home, you will remember, the night after the burial. If she had not have died while I was away, there'd be nothing for me to regret. Your love I never valued, but she, I believe, loved me as her own child. You promised to forgive all, but soon you forgot that promise. It was my crime to have nobody on earth who cared for me or loved me. My determination is at length taken to leave your house and endeavor to find some place in this wide world where I will not be treated as you have treated me. As to your injunction not to trouble you with further communication, rest assured, sir, that I will most religiously observe of it. When I left you, I knew that I should never see you again.
James Allan and Poe were now thoroughly estranged, and Poe set off to make his mark on the world as a writer. He constantly moved from one job to the next, living in Baltimore, Richmond, New York City, Philadelphia, and Boston in the time between 1831 and 1849. He became a famous literary critic for the new and flourishing magazine business.
He was known as a nasty critic.
An honest critic.
Works like this of Professor Longfellow are the grief of all true criticism. It is universally admitted that the poetic claims of Mr. Longfellow have been vastly overrated. In the present instance, without design, without beginning, middle, or end, what earthly object has his book accomplished? What definite impression has it left? I intend to put up with nothing that I put down.
Poe's dream was to publish a magazine of his own, but his ventures failed many, many times because of lack of funding.
This was when Poe began writing. He published his first book of poetry in 1827 and continuously published his short stories in magazines. During this time, the Romanticism movement was taking America by storm. Its ideal of emotion over reason inspired many of Poe's works. Audiences loved his short stories and poems. The Fall of the House of Usher, The Mask of the Red Death, Annabel Lee, The Telltale Heart. The Raven was a particular triumph. It made Poe a household name.
But Poe only received $9 to publish The Raven in the Evening Mirror in 1845. Although Poe certainly wrote many classic short stories and poems, he was never paid much for any of them, and he struggled with debt and financial strain throughout his entire life.
Well, he married his 13-year-old cousin Virginia in 1836. They had a very happy marriage. She was his muse and they adored each other.
Happy marriage?
A wife whom I have loved as no man ever loved before, ruptured a blood vessel in singing. Her life was despaired of. She recovered partially, and again I hoped. At the end of the year, the vessel broke again, and I went through precisely the same scene. Then again, and even once again at varying intervals. Each time I felt all the agonies of her death, in which each accession of despair, I loved her more dearly and clung on to her with more desperate pertinacity. I became insane with long intervals of horrible insanity. During these fits of absolute unconsciousness, I drank, God only knows how often or how much. I had indeed nearly abandoned all hope of a permanent cure when I found her in the death of my wife. In the death of what was my life, I receive anew, but, oh God, how melancholy an existence.
No wonder Poe's stories are so horrific and grim. Poe died only 2 years after his wife on October 7, 1849, after being found unconscious in a tavern wearing clothing that was not his own. I guess one reason for his mysterious death was a broken heart.
Think about that when you portray Poe. His heart was broken many times over. Remember your father, David Poe, abandons the family. Your mother, Elizabeth Arnold Poe, dead. Your adopted mother, Frances Allan, dead. Your adopted father, James Allan, estranged and leaves you out of his will. Your brother, William Poe, dead. Your darling little wife, Virginia, dead. Poe's life was one tragedy after another.
All right, let me try this again.
Nevermore, take 2, action.
Once upon a midnight jury, while I pondered, weak and weary, over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, as I nodded...
Cut! That's still nowhere near an accurate representation of Edgar Allan Poe. Where did you get all this information?
I read his first biography, A Memoir of the Author by Rufus Griswold.
Of course you have this information. Griswold sought to discredit his arch-rival after Poe's death. Today, many remember Edgar Allan Poe as an alcoholic, an insane madman, and we have Griswold to thank for those rumors. Poe's legacy was and remains tragically slandered.
But even a scandalous biography can't reduce Poe's many literary triumphs. After all, Griswold's biography only increased his popularity in America. Everybody loves a scandalous backstory.
And even before Poe's infamy grew in America, Poe's works were a triumph in Europe. He helped American literature get taken seriously as part of the American literary renaissance. Before Poe's time, literature in the U.S. was plagiarized or imported from Europe. Poe was the first American writer to make his living entirely off of his writings, and his brilliance put America on the literary map.
Poe was the major contributor to the horror genre. He knew how to use the universal human emotion, fear, to tell stories of madness, lost loves, and deadly friendships.
Poe invented the modern crime mystery story with his The Murders at the Rue Morgue. Sherlock Holmes is an imitation of Poe's detective, C. Auguste Dupin. So is pretty much every other modern-day crime-solving genius.
Poe reinvented the science fiction genre with the balloon hoax. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, H.P. Lovecraft, Stephen King, Jules Verne, H.G. Wells, all were inspired by Poe. Along with that, Poe's stories still live on to this day, haunting generations of readers.
Edgar Allan Poe lived an incredibly tragic life, but it gave way to triumphant contributions to American literature. That's a wrap. Everybody back here tomorrow at 9.
And the raven, never flitting, still is sitting on the pallid bust of Pallas just above my chamber door. And his eyes have all the gleaming of a demon that is dreaming, and the lamplight o'er him streaming throws his shadow on the floor. And my soul from out that shadow that lies floating on the floor shall be lifted nevermore.
Thank you.
Very nice. Are you guys family?
Yeah.
We are. We're triplets, actually.
The triplets?
Yeah.
Hey, let me have a little bit of that actually. I love that triplets came and did this, did like this.
Yeah.
how'd you choose Poe? I mean, it's a powerful literary person, but powerful story too.
Well, I mean, we all just kind of love reading and love literature. So that was just one of the things we went to when like choosing a topic, just like authors. And initially we thought of Poe for his like tragedy in his stories, like the horror, the darkness of his stories. But the more we researched Poe, we actually found that the tragedy, there was a lot of tragedy in his life. So we thought that because he's obviously triumphant, because he's still so influential today, that it would be a perfect fit for the theme this year.
You did a really nice job on,
Yeah.
on presenting triumph and tragedy and bringing that theme really into his life. I was very strong with that.
What was the, you have a lot of resources here. What was the most important resource that you feel that contributed to it here?
I think it would probably be his letters, because they gave such insight into his life, because he wrote a lot of letters to different people. A lot of them were just like asking for money because he was so poor, or commenting on some sort of death, or maybe commenting on his hope for his new story. So all those letters, we didn't read all of them, but we read quite a few of them, and having that primary resource from Poe himself really helped us give an insight onto his life and what he was thinking at the time.
And then we tried to use those letters in our actual presentation. Everything that I read was actually from Poe's letters. So.
I especially liked in your bibliography, your annotations explaining why this resource was important to you and what you got from it. Because sometimes students just list the resource and you don't get a clue for it. But this little extra effort that you put into it.
Thank you.
Yeah. You know, on Edgar Allan Poe, what would you like to tell modern people about him?
I think the main thing we want people to get across is, first of all, that he didn't live as exciting as a life as people might think. Today, I think many people remember him as insane. They think he was addicted to opium, he was an alcoholic. And actually none of that is true. It came from his biography by Griswold. So we just really want people to fully appreciate his stories without looking at it through a lens of a madman, someone who was an insane genius. He was just a genius, flat out, just like that. And I think learning that can really also give you greater insight into his works, because if you understand the tragedy of his life, he has so many lost loves, and he lost his own love to tuberculosis.
Okay. I want to give you another kudos. I've seen a lot of these, and I do this work myself, historical reenactments. I love that you played music during your set.
Thank you.
You are just set the mood. It was a very, very good choice you guys made there. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you.